Okay, everybody, I'm Gail Wallace-Jack, and I have the opportunity to open this first session this morning. First of all, I want to express our gratitude to His Eminence Archbishop Demetrius, who's here again with us this morning after a fabulous lecture last night. And I want to tell you that his lecture has now been uploaded to Ancient Faith Radio. So for those of you that missed it, you can go to Ancient Faith Radio and hear his lecture last night. And believe me, I'm going to go listen to it again. It was really great. With that, I'd like to start out and introduce our first speaker of the day. It's really a privilege for me to introduce Father Emmanuel Clapsis. I teach at Lutheran School of Theology in addition to my day job. And Father Emmanuel's name comes up because he's so involved in the Orthodox Lutheran dialogue. He's really a world-renowned, respected theologian. We're really blessed to have him. He did his BA at Hellenic College here, and also his MDiv here, so he's a son of this school. He then went to Union Theological Seminary, where he did multiple degrees, finally ended in a PhD from Union. He's taught here at Holy Cross for many years. He's respected his students, praise his teaching, and his book, Orthodoxy in Conversation, is one that is mentioned in ecumenical circles all over. He's been heavily involved in representing the Orthodox Church in ecumenical dialogue over the years. He's now currently the Archbishop Iakovos Professor of Orthodox Theology here at Holy Cross. So please, let's join together and welcome Father Emmanuel, who's going to talk about the theology of the human person in this morning's lecture.
As His Eminence said yesterday, we cannot exhaust the Orthodox reflection at the nature of human being, so I chose to address some elements of theological anthropology. And that means that what I will present to you is not everything that we believe and about the nature of human person. Theological anthropology in Christian tradition has not been sufficiently addressed, since it has never become a major topic of debate in the doctrinal history of the Church.
Can we announce that your paper is in their packet? Would you like me to do it? Forgive the interruption. I want to point out that the text of this talk, Father Emmanuel was gracious and prompt enough to have submitted the text, and we've included it in your packet for you to follow along. There's some patristic text that he'll be reading for him, and he thought it'd be easier to have if you have it in front of you. So forgive that.
So, theological anthropology in Christian tradition has not been sufficiently addressed, since it has never become a major topic of debate in the doctrinal history of the Church. Thus, orthodoxy does not have an authoritative doctrinal definition of the different elements of the human nature. Questions of how the soul is united to the body, whether the intellect, nous, should be understood as residing in the head or in the heart, and what the seat of imagination or of memory is, have remained open questions according to St. Gregory Palamas. Human physiology in theological anthropology may be a subject for philosophical and scientific exploration under the provision that the principles that reflect the teachings of the Church about the relationship of humanity with God are maintained. In Christian tradition, there are few treatises specifically devoted to anthropology in conversation with philosophy and medicine, such as Gregory of Nyssa's tract on the creation of the human person and a message of MSA work on the nature of the human person, both of the 4th century. These treatises provide insights in guiding the conversation between theology, philosophy, medicine, and other scientific disciplines regarding the nature of humanity, the mystery of being human. Theological anthropology acknowledges that the complexity of human nature cannot be sufficiently and exhaustively understood and described. The indefinable character of humanity reflects the theological belief that human beings have been created in God's image and likeness. They are icons of the uncreated God. And since God is incomprehensible, so also is the human being. The recognition that a human being is a mystery should not lead to the assumption that it is impossible to know some elements or aspects of the human nature. It rather underscores the belief that human beings cannot be comprehensively described by any scientific, philosophical, or even religious method. It is axiomatic in theological anthropology that human beings must be seen from the perspective of dependence on God, since as created beings, they depend on Him for sustenance and human fulfillment. Human fulfillment and flourishing is experienced as human beings relate to God and deepen their relationship with Him through Christ and the Holy Spirit. In fact, no element or aspect of the universe is really independent of God. God is the Lord of all creation. Human beings, according to the biblical narrative of creation, are the final work of creation, the embodiment of all the creatures and nature. The relationship that human beings enjoy with God is one that they share with all of God's creation. The complex system, human beings, contain within itself all simpler systems has been built up and has proceeded. In this sense, they are present in Him as He is dependent on them. A human being is a microcosm, a second cosmos reflecting and embracing the different aspects of the created universe. Every human being is an icon of the world. Senilus of Angela states, "You are a universe within a universe." Look within yourself and see there the whole creation. Human beings' unity with and dependence on nature must be affirmed in the strongest possible manner in light of the present awareness of how the vision of the new heaven and new earth of the Christian gospel has been limited to the notion only of the salvation of human soul. The fact that a human being is a microcosm, a miniature of the world, is not the greatest unique gift that humanity has received from God. In the words of St. Gregory of Nyssa, the greatness of the human being does not consist in gaining a likeness to the created universe in himself, but in being in the image of the nature of Him who made him. Human beings, by virtue of the intrinsic relationship of dependence on created reality, cannot be understood apart from or independently of the natural world. And here I will subscribe, yes, human beings are a biological organism, but neither can human beings can be reduced to merely physical reality, since they have been created in God's image and are partaking of God's breath. Created in God's image. What differentiates human beings from the rest of the creation is both the manner of their creation by God compared to the rest of the created world, and their creation in God's image and likeness. In Genesis, we read, God said, "Let us make humankind, Adam, in our image according to our likeness." So God created humankind, Adam, in his image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. Here, Adam, humankind, refers not to a particular individual, but to the universal man, the one who embraces humanity as differentiated entity. This means that all the divine gifts that God has bestowed on Adam in creation must be applied to the whole human nature. The multiple existences of persons in the race of Adam do not destroy the unity of humanity. The affirmation that human beings are made in God's image and likeness is another foundational principle of Orthodox anthropology. The biblical narrative of creation, however, is silent about any qualities of human nature that might be account for this special studying of God's image and likeness. St. Epiphanius of Salamis observes, tradition holds that every human being is in the image of God, but does not define exactly in what this image consists. Creation in God's image is not a way of saying something about human beings as such. It is a way of pointing to a special relationship between them and God. Patristic tradition has adopted a variety of opinions about those parts or qualities of human being that reflect the image of God. Some fathers identify the divine image with the soul and not with the human body. Others identify the image of God with particular human faculties, converging at the belief that human will, intellect, and freedom all bear a resemblance of God. And still others insisted that the divine image embraced the totality, the total human being. St. Irenaeus is a notable example of this. He states, by the hands of the Father, that is, by the Son and the Spirit, the human person was created in the likeness of God. The person was so created, not just a part of the person. Now, the soul determines that the soul and the spirit are certainly a part of the person, yet they are not the person as such. Thus, the special relationship of God with human beings bear not as some single aspects of humanity, but as human beings as such, in and through all that they are, having been created in the image of God, discloses the potential and the promise that humanity will be true to its nature in developing and maintaining a life of communion with God and carrying out God's purposes in humanity's historical existence. Some of the fathers have differentiated the notion of image and likeness to illustrate the dynamic nature of humanity. Image was understood to refer to whatever uniquely differentiates human beings from the rest of the created world. And likeness, on the other hand, denoted the fullness of the virtue and perfection that a human being attains by freely moving towards God and doing His will. This differentiation describes the dynamic nature of humanity and its movement from potentialities to actualities, from capacities to full realities. It underscores the process by which the animated beings that we call humans become truly humans by freely responding to God's love through commitment and action. This underscores the fact that human beings have been granted by God the gift of freedom and self-determination that gives them the potential to develop a personal relationship with God and with the rest of the created world, body and soul. Human beings in the biblical narrative of creation are constituted by a complex relationship between dust of the ground and breath of life. And I quote Genesis again. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being or a living soul. In the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the Septuagint, the dust of the ground seemed to cohere with the traditional understanding of body as a material entity, and the notion of breath of life seemed to correspond to the traditional understanding of soul as a spiritual, that is a mode of reality that is not distributed over space, cannot be sensed, and cannot be disintegrated. A human being, according to the biblical tradition, is a single psychophysical organism made up of two elements, the nephesh, soul, and the basar, flesh. Nephesh is the dynamic element of a living being, which sometimes is identified with the heart, the seat of thinking, willing, and feeling. It signifies the way in which life is manifested in man. It does not refer just to one department of human existence, the spiritual in opposition to the material, but signifies the whole man, a single living hypostasis. Basar, on the other hand, refers to the bodily manifestation of the soul and the intrinsic relationship of humanity with the rest of the natural world. The body intrinsically belongs to the fullness of human existence. The soul and the body stand for the whole person perceived from a different angle. When St. Paul, for instance, distinguishes between the psychikon soma, the ensouled body of the first Adam, and the spiritual body, soma pneumatiko, of the second Adam, refers to two ways of living, one in conformity with the Spirit of God and the other in conformity with the world. The fathers of the Church in general consider body and soul as two differentiating and co-inherent elements of human nature. St. Justin, in his treatise on the resurrection, characteristically states, "For what is a man but a reasonable animal composed of body and soul? Is the soul by itself man? No, but the soul of man. Would the body be called man? No, but it is called the body of man. Neither of these is by itself man, but that which is made up of the two together is called man. And God has called man to life and resurrection. He has called not part, but the whole, which is the soul and the body." The differentiation of body and soul should not lead to the devaluation of the body compared to the soul. The human body created by God is essentially good, as it is the case with the entirety of God's creation, the natural world. Thus, to have a body is not an evil, nor a punishment. The Church has rejected such a view in condemning Origen. Once we affirm the differentiation, but not the division into two separate parts of body and soul, it is inevitable to wonder how the body and the soul interact in living human beings, and more importantly, what is the nature of the soul. Saint Gregory of Nyssa defines the soul, and I think this is the first definition that we have of the soul in Christian tradition, as created, living, rational substance, which imparts of itself to an organic body capable of sensation, the power of life and sensation, so long as the nature capable of such things exists. And then we have another definition of the human soul in the writings of St. John of Damascus. The nature of the soul is spiritual and incorporeal compared to the materiality of the body. Furthermore, it is simple, uncompounded, and indivisible. In his discussion of the activities of the soul with the body, he refers to parts or aspects of the soul, but he also warns that one should not be led to believe that the soul is divided into three parts. The true and perfect soul, τελεία ψυχή, is one in nature, spiritual and immaterial, and endowed with the powers it imparts to the material body. The cause of life, το ζωτικόν αίτιον, is the soul, while the body is compounded, σύγκριμα, on concourse of elements. He identifies the soul with the rational faculty, κυρίως ψυχή, η λογική και εστί. He identifies the soul with the rational faculty. He writes, κυρίως ψυχή, η λογική και έστι, και λέγεται, εδέ άλλε ομονίμως κατονομάζονται. He insists that the rational and spiritual faculty is the ruling principle of the soul, and everything irrational connected with the soul is not part of the soul itself, but a vital activity essential to the existence of man. For neither do the senses exist without a material existence, nor the rational faculty without the senses. The communication or collaboration of the rational soul with the irrational faculties in the body do not affect its essential nature. Such is the remarkable union of this spirit with the matter, that all the lower powers serve the higher, from which they receive life, while the intellect itself is dependent on the senses for communication with the outer world. The rationality of the soul reflects God's image in man, once it is intrinsically linked to the notion of self-determination, proeresis, a gift of God's benevolence and creative wisdom. And I have a big quotation, which in my view it is very important. He, God, who has powers over the universe, permitted, moved by his great consideration for man, that something be under a complete dominion, and that each one be the only Lord. This is our liberty of choice, proeresis, a reality not subject to enslavement, free, based upon the liberty of our reason. Proeresis is the liberty which permits the human beings to be self-determined beings. They are God's image because they are rational beings endowed with freedom. Their uniqueness is reflected in their capacity, unlike the rest of the animals, to be free from the bondage of nature and be able to create their own personal world out of it, to be creative like God in the world, to take nature and freely cultivate it and use it as a material for human creativity. Gregory Nyssa insists that there is no power which can coerce or determine human freedom. Its activity remains self-initiated. It is precisely in this sense that self-determination is equal to a divine attribute. He states, «Ισόθεον γα εστί το αυτεξούσιον». Some people, they say the affectation is equal to God, but the one is faculty, the other one is person. The limitation of God's image in man strictly to the spiritual aspect of his being, the soul, since the bodily material is by definition unable to represent the material and spiritual God, is highly problematic. It has literally inhuman consequences. This perspective implies that any situation of mental illness or traumatic brain damage which entails an upset or loss of rationality, free will, and dominion demotes the person from the status of an image of God to that of a single animal. And when a human being is burdened with such a loss from birth, he or she is not to be considered human being in God's image. My position: while it is true that human beings have been endowed with the possibility to transcend the limits of their nature by exercising the gift of rationality and free will, it is important to assert that these gifts embody and communicate without exhausting the image of God in human beings. This implies that if human beings lose one or more of these functions, this in itself does not mean that they cease to be personal beings with the possibility to transcend the limitations of their nature through God's initiative to invite them to live and experience their humanity in loving communion with Him. Now, regarding the origins of the soul, St. Gregory rejects as imaginary fiction and absurdity the view that the soul was created before the body, a notion that he believes is borrowed from the Greek philosophy. He suggests that both come into existence together through though St. Gregory was at loss to explain how. He was content to believe that somehow the power of God intervenes to change the sperm into the most wondrous living thing. Yet the soul in itself is not the source and the cause of life, but only the bearer and the manifestation of life that has its origins in God. If the soul is incorporeal and it cannot be conceived apart from the body, what is its exact location in the human body? St. Gregory discusses in detail the Platonic view of locating the soul to the nous in the head, and the Stoic view that locates the nous to the heart. He further reflects on the physiological processes by which the soul relates and acts together with the body. Yet he does not accept any of these theories that place the soul inside of a specific part of the body. He believes that the psychosomatic unity of man, shown by the connection between the physical process and the soul's activities, cannot explain how the soul is joined to the body. The kind of union between an intelligible and spiritual nature, such as the soul, and a corporeal and material reality, such as the body, is profoundly different from any union between physical realities. In his view, spatial locations fit only the physical realities, and since the soul is not a physical reality, it cannot be reduced to the categories of material world. The corporeal cannot be limited in space. The soul, the mind, permeates the whole body without being identified, located, or limited to any of the body parts. It accompanies the material body even after its dissolution. The soul exists in the actual atoms that it had once animated, and there is no force to tear it away from its cohesion with them. How this is done is, in the words of St. Gregory of Nyssa, incomprehensible and inexpressible. In the face of this mystery, he suggests to view the human body as an intrinsically exquisite musical instrument. So the mind, an invisible entity, he maintains, moves to each part of the instrument, performing that function necessary to the well-being of that feature of human physiology. In this manner, each and all perform their role for the natural health and harmony of the full person. St. Gregory of Nyssa, although he affirms the preeminence of the rational faculty of the soul as the created reality of God's image in man, continues to operate with a biblical understanding that human beings reflect God's image as psychosomatic beings. This is evident in his refusal to conceive of the soul apart or independently of the body, as well as the dependence of the soul upon the body for the activation of its creative, rational, and life-giving energies. Now, if man is a psychophysical being, constituted by the intrinsic and inseparable unity of the body and soul, the question arises, what remains of human existence and personhood after death? Human beings have received from God the gift to transcend the limitations of their created nature, not by virtue of the immortality of the soul, but by the intimate relationship and communion with God through Jesus Christ, his death and resurrection. Death, in this context, signifies separation from God, the denial of being with him, the refusal of life of love. Eternal life, consequently, is not attained through some elements of the human nature or an inherent human potential. It is granted as a gift that reflects God's love for his creation through God's economy. Human life beyond death is granted only to those who live in unity with God through Christ. Humanity and creation have a future because of God's love and his active involvement in the life of the world. After the resurrection of Christ and the sending of the Holy Spirit, humanity and the created world has received the gift or the possibility to participate in God's entire life. This participation in God and in God's exalted life of communion will be personal. Humanity and creation, transformed by God's grace, will be known and relate to God as embodied personal realities. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Emmanuel. That was a really beautiful, very rich presentation. It's now open for questions. So if you have a question, please stand up so that we can hear it well. I'll start off and ask the first one so people can think about it. Your description about people that are disabled mentally I think really touched upon a very important issue. And I've dealt a number of times with families where the child has had spina bifida, really no brain development or anything else. And yet we still say that person is a person. And I wonder whether that like personhood in community somehow fits into that particular situation. Could you comment a little bit more on that?
Well, if relations constitute our identity, people remain subjects to us, but more importantly to God, as they are. And therefore, simply because they don't have the rational faculties or the freedom, it doesn't mean that there are not different ways of relating with God. They may not be able to respond to God's love by exercising their rationality and their freedom, but from God's perspective, they continue to be His beloved children. And also from those who have established with them a relationship of love, they continue to be human persons. They cannot be simply reduced to objects.
Thank you. Mike? Yeah, go ahead, please.
All right, so the question is, if we have someone before us who's either comatose, who has severe dementia, cannot really appreciate our presence, at least at the level of the mind, the biological mind, and we whisper in their ears words of love, well, how does the church see that human being before us as hearing or appreciating what we're telling them, what we're whispering in their ear? What's your understanding of a soul awareness, if there is such a thing?
First of all, St. Gregory of Nyssa has differentiated the brain from the mind, from nous, and he refused to identify the mind with the brain. It is very clear in his writings. From my perspective, it is not what you are saying to the people, but it is how you relate to them. And it is very important to move beyond the cognitive emphasis of relationships. Sometimes people relate to one another not by what they say, but how they relate to, but how they come in contact with them. And therefore, the respect that you have for the persons reflects your recognition they continue to be the subjects of God's love, and they continue to be an expression of God's presence in your life, although they live under challenging conditions. So it is important here to emphasize that it is in relationships that we disclose our respect and our loving attitudes towards this kind of people.
Question.
Thank you.
Could you stand up and say your name too?
My name is Lilia Mirabili. I'm a psychiatrist from Montreal. I have a comment. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for bringing all this very rich patristic literature to us, because it is definitely very much compatible with everything that we see in everyday practice. And I'm referring to the examples that were given before, which is part of my daily practice, really. I would like to make a comment on the two words, anthropos and prosopo, which reflect, as you said from the beginning, the relational aspect of the development, if you want, of soul the way I understand it in practice. And anthropos in ancient Greek means the one who is looking towards the high. So right away, this is the way we are positioned, and what everything you said that is brought to us as we are created. Now, to become a prosopon, to become a person, to actually become somebody who is looking towards somebody else, takes work. And I relate those two to the image and likeness. And in fact, I believe that in fact, even children that do not have the capacity, that lack the capacity, the rational capacity obviously, we all know they have a soul, and the way this manifestation of the soul comes through bodily functions, and what counts is not the verbal or the cognitive, as you pointed out, but the experience. And the experience altogether has a lot of non-cognitive, non-verbal aspects to it. We all know that the way we learn ourselves to experience love comes from the way we have been handled from the very beginning of our life. And a baby metabolizes and understands and is able to express emotion and to express even language through the relationship that he has with what we call the primary objects, the mother and the father, or the people who are the caretakers at the very beginning. So we know that all the networks and the associations in the brain develops at the very beginning, and there are other phases. There is the adolescence, during which there is a major change in terms of the neurons in the brain again. So all the experiences that we have in relationships is what shows us and manifests to us what it means to experience different emotions and love. And I'm not going to go very far in these examples, but this is what actually remains of us, also when we are not there anymore. The love and the influence that we have on each other. And this is why I think in our faith, we are very unique, because the Orthodox Christian anthropology is extremely rich and comes from an era where our neurological understanding was not there, yet it is extremely compatible with everything that has been coming out in scientific methods today. And
well, I will agree with you, but from a theological perspective, I will affirm everything that you have said, but I will insist that all the experiences of life that we have in interpersonal relationships, in relating to one another, must be related with the reality of God.
absolutely.
So we must have a theanthropic understanding of reality. And therefore, orthodoxy does not oppose scientific inquiry, and it is not against the development of science, but I would like science to have an open horizon, and somehow everything that we say about what is a human being must be related to God. In fact, the totality of reality, if it is not related with God, does not reflect what reality is actually.
I agree with you. What I said comes from my experience of
I
people
agree with you in
who have a
everything.
very hard time to even conceive the notion of God, because all they have seen in their lives is abuse, neglect, and more abuse. So for somebody whom from very, very early on has not experienced anything else, any notion of an all love being is very foreign. So this is why I said that way.
How do you experience God? For me, in dialogue with science, I will insist against any closed systems that have the ambition to exhaustively describe what is human. And therefore, orthodoxy encourages scientists to have an open horizons in understanding the mystery of life. And if to be human is an inexhaustible mystery, we try to learn from one another, and in that context, theologians have the possibility to learn from the scientists, and scientists can learn from the theologians that the complexity and the mystery of human life cannot be self-referential. It should be open to greater realities from what we can experience and through observation, what we can verify through observation.
Question? Yeah, please.
I'm Peter Engel. I'm an internal medicine physician and a physician who works at the VA Medical Center in Boston. I really wanted to share some experiences from my professional life that impact on my own personal sense of soul. The first experience I feel it was a very profound, and I've only been privileged to experience this several times. The first type of experience was to be with a patient, with a person at the moment of their death. And that is a deeply profound spiritual sort of experience in which the sense of the body being alive, there was a humanity, and then there was just elements there, no life, was extraordinary. And I also had a sense, as the life left, that the soul was leaving and dispersing amongst those of us standing around this person. So that soul was out there, and it lived on in us. It moved into us. That's a personal, emotional experience. The second sort of experience I've had has been in the care of people with dementia. It's an area that I've been interested in for a long time. And there's a type of dementia called frontotemporal dementia, in which a person begins to lose their personality, their capacity to attend, understand, and make informed judgments, moral, political, any sort of judgment, and just to become an awake, alert, irritable individual without the complexity and substance and conflict and richness and subtleties that make up a human being, which also feels to me like the soul. That's the soul of a person, of humanity. And what I found in this kind of work that makes it hard but acceptable and of some substance is to find what's left in the humanity of people who've lost so much of it. So I've come to suggest, as you were talking about, well, where is the soul? Is it here? Is it there? So I would argue that the seat of the soul is in the overgrown prefrontal cortex of the human brain.
Well, this is very important. You know, how would St. Gregory respond to this? First of all, at the moment of death, the relationship of the soul with the body is not extinguished. Even when the body returns to the earth, that relationship continues. And the question is, what remains of the human being after the experience of the biological death? From a Christian perspective, if I expect the resurrection of the dead, I will maintain that our particularity as human subjects continues to exist either in us, in the rest of humanity, but more especially in God's love. And therefore, the relationship that we have with God maintains our particularity until the resurrection. You know, we don't believe in the transmigration of the souls. We believe that each human being is unique, based on his relationship with the world and with other human beings and with God. And that uniqueness, the hypostasis of his being, is maintained in God through Christ's resurrection. So I will refuse to believe that somehow the biological death is the death of all that exists because of God's love. Because what is related with God, the love of God transcends space and time and the categories of physicality. We have now His Eminence here. He may say his own wisdom, because he's a biblical scholar. He's one of the greatest theologians that we have, and I know that I may speak a little bit.
There are no other questions?
At the end, you will say
we have to move
something.
on, but he is asking you if you would like to comment.
Well, thank you for the presentation. It was really something exceedingly rich, theologically, patristically, and responding to the theme of this OCAMPR conference. Now, the material that Father Emmanuel presented is a material extremely rich and complicated. If I may offer one or two observations, I would say, thank you. That's the importance of having good deacons around. I would say that in the presentation was a very clear picture about the body-soul connection. Let's call it a dualistic understanding. I would like to just bring to the attention that we have to have something more about the spirit, the mind thing. Is it a component of the soul, or is something a bit more independent? I would suggest read the New Testament. Remember Jesus on the cross. Pater εις χείρα σου παρατίθεμαι το πνεύμα μου. Father, in your hands I am placing my spirit, not την ψυχή μου, not my soul. I mean, there are elements, biblical elements, very strong, that point to this aspect. And you see, you have the whole vocabulary of pneumatikos. Even the spiritual father in the Greek is called pneumatikos. It's not called psychikos. Psychikos in the language of St. Paul is something not so good. Άνθρωπος ψυχικός δεν αντιλαμβάνεται την αλήθεια του πνεύματος. Εγένετο ο πρώτος άνθρωπος ψυχικός, αρχικός, ο νέος Αδάμ είναι πνευματικός. So we need to have, that was inherent in what Father Emmanuel said, but we have to keep also in mind, because normally with this kind of body, soul thing, we think more on emotional and things like that. We don't think of intellectual mind processes, which are very important, and they are denoted very clearly by the term pneuma, which, by the way, is involved in the creation. Father Emmanuel very nicely mentioned the nefesh and the basar in the first people, the nefesh being the soul and the basar being the flesh. But in the whole thing is involved another term, ruach, which means pneuma. And so it's something we have to keep in mind, which makes the reality of creation thankfully more complicated and not easy to grasp so easily. Good Plato, with soul, body, thinking, he created the whole system. He was very happy. And although he was a great intellectual. But you need to have in mind also this aspect of pneuma, and I think it's inherent in what Father Emmanuel has said, and I think we can profit a lot from his presentation, because the material, especially coming from St. Gregory of Nyssa, and then St. John Damascenus, and even St. Gregory Palamazine, it's very, very useful. So that was a very wonderful thing to start the morning with body, soul, and mind too. Thank you.